Hi guys, Luton here, back for another episode of Below the Line. This is the series where I pose a question, you guys write your comments down below, and then in the next episode I answer those comments. The format is, for the first maybe 2/3 of the video, I reply to those comments and we discuss the topic at hand, and then toward the end of the video I produce a new topic for you guys and you can then write your comments on this video, which I will pick the best from for the next one. So that topic last time was about BioWare. It was about the way in which Electronic Arts, but as I said at the time, maybe all companies, all major publishers are looking at the way that they had assessed that an open world style game is basically best for monetization. They have identified that it was best for monetization, and it gave like an insight into where these companies are coming from. The fact that they have, pinned down one specific game genre as being ripe for exploiting microtransactions speaks a lot about where their position is, where they're coming from, and essentially the ethics of these kind of businesses. So first up we got Hybrid Audio, who says, excellent videos always, Luton. I do want to acknowledge this dev coming out, that was Mana Air, and speaking against EA, most devs refuse to talk to the press because of reprisals from a major corporation. I will say a lot of companies also have very extensive NDAs, which basically prevent them from talking, often years after they have finished working on a game. So it's not just that they don't want to, it's often that they cannot because they are legally bound to not speak out about a game, which again is one reason why we start to get fragmented information about these kind of things. And also at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, if they have these extremely extensive NDAs, what are they hiding? So Hybrid says, a lot of devs I've befriended over the years currently or at some point worked for a larger studio with a major publisher. Most of them share the same sentiment that newbies tend to be a bit more starstruck to ever see the issues before them. I think I can definitely see that. They say they cannot express their opinions openly, mostly because they're contractually not allowed to speak out against the company, like I just said. He says, I've been offered jobs by friends working at major studios in the past, but I've turned them down. Normally most people would consider that ludicrous because it can be potentially stable income that pays way higher than some indie projects, but I turn them down because these studios and publishers squeeze the life out of you. You can't express your creativity, nor does your opinion matter in these larger companies, because money is the largest driving factor, rather than the art or just the sheer enjoyment of making a game. He goes on saying, my father, who's retired and invests in regularly the US stock exchange as his day job, had an interesting point to make that encompasses both topics. Companies will be forced to change their strategy if the investors start to see negative press about the business strategies they employ and start to question the company about it. Once that happens, the CEO will have to either put the fire out fast or turn about their strategy. The latter is harder because putting out fires is usually the quickest and most effective method. And you see this all the time whenever they get called out or there is some kind of huge trending topic around these practices, whether it's the patenting of something by Activision or whether it's loot crates by EA. So he says, I agree with you that we need to put a bigger spotlight on this issue. The more we apply pressure, then the more likely we'll start to see investors getting nervous. It has already happened with Visceral shutdown, but it can be more effective if content creators like yourself work at shining a light on these ugly nature of microtransactions. And I think that's really true. I'll say more about that in another comment that comes up later on, but I think essentially that's a very interesting comment there. There's a lot of really solid insight, and I think there's something that everybody can take away. So Van Haller next says, big studios are beholden to their shareholders. Again, there's I think a lot of people are all on the same page here. And I think this goes to show that, people do know what they're talking about. People are aware of these things. But again, it's just what can you do? We'll talk about this more. And he says, unfortunately, we have a system wherein they must try and make the most money possible. Otherwise, they can get in trouble and get fired. This means microtransactions, shady gambling mechanics are going to become more and more a AAA title system, so long as it keeps making the money. Totally agree. He says, I wonder though if there is a cross-media trend towards shallow depth narrative / gameplay. However, he says you can look at Michael Bay, Jerry Bruckheimer films and see the same review versus return. It's absolutely true, and it's critically depressing. He says Transformers is such a good example. By all critical accounts, garbage fire, but it makes studio millions and is considered a guaranteed slam dunk. with its tie-ins and merchandise and so on. Likewise, COD, Battlefield, Battlefront go with glitz and glamour rather than content and depth. I think some people would pick up on that and say that's not true, but I think this issue about Battlefield being diluted is a bit contentious. A lot of people don't agree. I think it's not as bad as people make out. He says, is an oversimplified, easy accessible title, be it movie or game, the growing trend in a world that takes its presidential press releases in 140 characters or less? The end result is a changing of value for dollar, I think. Your $80 doesn't get you what it used to anymore. Perhaps we are becoming that crotchety old grandpa saying, in my day a chocolate bar cost a nickel. That's definitely me. But at the same time, we're surrounded by thousands of indie titles and delicious treats that were heretofore unheard of when we were in our nascent gaming years. We're spoiled for choice, and yet we still marvel at all the fools choosing to stuff their faces at McDonald's. Can you tell them that I'm hungry? Keep up the good stuff and be the food/game taster/tester and help us buck that trend. Again, you know, it is a growing trend, but it's very, very difficult. But it does lead me to this comment. So, Pizza Sky, and again, like I've said before, guys, I like to include comments that are not just like going, I agree with you, LT, I agree with you. So look, Pizza Sky says, Luton, do you ever feel like you're just repeating yourself? Not that what you're saying isn't important, because what you say is important, but every time I click on a below the line, it's like I'm listening to a broken record because you seem to repeat the same points that you bring up in previous below the line videos. But in a way, it's good that your discussion videos are repetitive, because you can never call out bullshit too many times, and then new people might come by and say to themselves, hey, I agree with what this guy has to say. And then they might watch your other videos or just think, and I think he actually meant to say something else there, but it got cut off, I don't know. I replied back saying, I hear you, but the issues covered recently have been nuanced, which is true. You know, that they're kind of the same, but they all have like little changes to it. So it does feel like the issues are the same. I would say maybe the broader issue is the same, but there is, you know, there's detail in there. But I say it's still the same base problem, and also I think repetition is necessary right now. As well, this has just been a lot of stories around this kind of stuff. But look, so this ties in with a couple of those other ones where people are saying like, what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? And the other thing is, I pick up Pizza Sky's comment here, right, mainly because I very often get a lot of people commenting who are like, oh, LT, you're just saying the same thing. And also a lot of people going like, nothing's going to change, we can't do anything about it, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, look, yeah, it feels horrible, it feels terrifying facing up to something which is so huge and seems so out of depth. And also, let's be real, like, my channel doesn't get like giant traction, you know? Like, when I post these videos, I don't get like 100,000 views on this video, I don't get 500,000 views on this video, but it's a drip, drip, drip. It's part of having a whole conversation. So it's like, I make a video talking about it, somebody else makes a video talking about it, somebody else makes a video talking about it, somebody writes an article about it, somebody shares some stuff on social media, they link those things together. You know, it's part of creating a conversation. It's kind of like voting, you know, it's like one person, people always say like one person's vote doesn't matter, right? But it does matter, because if that one person had the attitude of like, oh, I don't want to vote, and then all the other people also all have that attitude, well, hey, then you end up in a dictatorship, you know? So it's like, you have to have everybody all together to make things actually happen. So, you know, yes, right now it seems like untenable and nothing can change, but it's about continuing those conversations on. And over time, in theory, once you start to, it's like, you know, a rolling stone gathering moss, you know, over time you will pick up more and more people who agree, who will talk to their friends, who will, you know, maybe share, or they will maybe discuss, and those people start to agree, and then companies over time start to go, you know, there's way too much negative press associated with doing this, maybe we should cut it out, you know? And exactly like some of the guys were saying there, when investors start to feel like they see a lot of news stories that are very negative, they start to get nervous, because it's all about perception as well. It's not often necessarily, I wouldn't say it's exclusively, like I wouldn't say that, you know, if a game sells really well that they wouldn't just keep doing it. Again, you know, the Transformers sort of example there, you know, it's like it's got all the criticism in the world, but they back it up with really solid numbers. But I wouldn't say there's any exclusivity to that. I think sometimes when it comes to big projects, you know, and games are very, very expensive, especially AAA games, it's a risk. Okay, it's a risk. And so if investors of that game, of that publisher, see like a lot of negativity around a certain practice, they might think to themselves, is all that negativity going to damage our sales, you know? So there's a risk to it. But with that said, you know, on the other hand, we've seen this, and a lot of people talk about this, the fact that despite all the negativity associated with these things, the games just continue to sell big, sell big, sell big, sell big. So yeah, right now, it's not having a lot of impact on people. But like I keep saying, you give these people an inch, they'll take a mile, and before you know it, you'll end up with bloody, like, gambling loot boxes throughout the whole of Battlefield and beyond, right? I mean, like I said, you don't think that in Star Wars Battlefront 2 that's coming up, that if people hadn't had a huge outrage, that they wouldn't have said, oh, don't worry, we're going to scale it back, we're going to scale it back, don't worry, don't worry. You think that if no one had made a fuss about it, that that wouldn't have happened? Really? It happened because people freaked out. So it is important, and it is important to continue having the conversation. But look, I totally agree on the other hand. You know, I can't just every episode of this series continue to speak about the same thing, same thing, same thing. So no, not at all. And actually, you know, again, the issue that I'm talking about today is not connected to that. But at the same time as well, this series isn't just about like me complaining or moaning or like just highlighting negative things that happen in the industry. I want to talk about positive stuff. I want to talk about like people's experiences in games. I want to talk about different age groups in gaming, like, you know, sort of guys like me who've played games for a long time, new people coming in, their perceptions, like what they expect out of games. There's a lot of interesting conversations there. There's a whole range of stuff that we can get into and talk about. But like I say, just at the moment, this is something which is very much on the radar, and it's something that I care about, that I've talked about for a long time, and that's why I've been discussing it a lot. Okay, so let's go on now to the ruler of all worlds and the destroyer of universes using a mighty spoon, aka Putin, who says, I feel like don't worry, he's got a really good comment. He says, I feel like the main problem is the general mentality when it comes to video games. Larger companies like Ubisoft or EA used to be behind great games which are considered as milestones in gaming history, like the early Settlers games, Battlefield 1942 or Battlefield 2 or certain Call of Duty titles. They seem to have gotten so fed up with the money-making potential of video games that they made, in my eyes, a crucial mistake, which is not nearly being punished as hard as it should be, which is providing an art-like consumer product, the games, without trying to make a peak performance with it. Sure, they are large companies and they want to make their money, but you cannot and must not turn a complex art which then will be consumed by the people into an industrial product. Kind of running low on my vocabulary here, so please bear with me, he says. As a reference though, a chef in a sense basically does the same thing as a game developer, so a bit of an analogy. He says he provides his art, his quality dishes to the customers, which will pay for it depending on the quality, the standards of the restaurant, so that could be seen as your publisher or developer. He says as such, the chef is motivated to cook at peak performance, to 1, make the customers happy, which will end up in them coming back, returning, and 2, to justify that high price tag for the standards of what you are making. And he goes on and says, now, imagine the restaurant owner says, fuck it, as long as the dish looks good, people are going to buy it. Do you guys seriously think that people would still be eating at that restaurant for the same price? Sure, the restaurant still looks fancy and so does the food, but that doesn't change the fact that the food still doesn't taste. It doesn't have that taste. It lacks what it takes to still be the art that we enjoy to consume. The thing that's happening right now with the consumer is called cognitive dissonance, and he said to translate it, it's basically cognitive dissonance. Doing something even though you know it is stupid. Hence, buying new FIFA or COD, even though you know it's the same bullshit again. And I think it's such a true statement. And he says, I know a couple of people in real life that are constantly saying how bad COD has gotten, yet they still buy every single COD, just to then complain about it afterwards. And it is mental. Do you know what that is? That is the sign of someone being addicted. That is the sign of an addiction, which is the same as anything else, whether it's gambling or alcoholism. He says, to finally sum my thoughts up though, it's actually so hard to detect the exact problems, especially since there are a lot of aspects that we don't know of, but I would tend to blame ourselves for the situation that we're in. The one difference between this cook restaurant and a development team publisher is that the backlash of failing to produce fair quality content is pretty much non-existent for these large companies of the gaming industry, at least from a future-like perspective. So we can whine and rant as much as we want, as long as we don't take action and create consequences that will hurt the company, nothing's going to change. And with that I mean to simply not buy the game. Dropping sales paired with constructive criticism will bring a change to the industry. And I think that's true. I think like I was saying before, I think that you can create some sense of kind of nervousness from investors or the guys that are higher up in a game company or whatever by sort of, you know, everybody talking out about these things, and maybe you'll see some changes there. Maybe some people will panic a little bit. On the other hand, you know, they can just, you know, they can pull the drawbridge up, you know, and they can just lock in, and they just won't share this stuff out. They can lock it down, and providing they're making the sales, you know, then they're going to be happy. So it swings and roundabouts. It's difficult to know which direction it could go in. But again, what options have you got? Very few. You've got very limited dialogue options when it comes to sort of how you can take this. Next up, Jacob, who says, "Hey LT, let's look truth in the eyes. Publishers won't care unless our actions hurt their profits, just as we're saying. But I think that there is a way to hurt them, at least a little bit. Buying loot crates for real money fulfills a definition of gambling to a T, of course varies from country to country. You pay your money for a chance to receive a reward. I highly doubt that, for example, EA has a gambling license in every country they sell their products in. Would it certainly be interesting to file a lawsuit against them? What's your opinions on this?" Okay, so look. A company as big as EA, a company as big as Ubisoft, a company as big as, you know, Activision, any giant publisher will have an extensive legal team. Okay, that team will have gone through all of this way ahead of time. Okay, they will not do anything where they would risk this being an issue. So that is not even on the table. But where you can come at it from is an interesting thing like we saw this week in the UK, where the British government actually had, basically in the British government, if enough people, like for example, sign a petition, then they have to discuss it. So they actually have to raise the point in Parliament in the UK. So if enough people sign a petition, I think it's like 100, 200 or 500,000, I can't remember. But basically a few 100,000 people, if you sign a petition, then the government have to discuss it, okay? It has to be raised. And this has happened recently with a load of different things. People wanted to have stuff raised, but it happens all the time. And one of those things was to do with kind of gambling and loot crates and so on in games. And I think actually where this was coming from was the issue with the T. Martin Syndicate, you know, gambling loot box systems and the issues of underage gambling. So you see, this is where I come back to yet again, talking about nervousness among investors and among companies. If they see a government start talking about maybe changing laws related to these kind of practices because enough gamers have maybe come together and been highlighting what total BS it is, you see how these things can happen. It's like, this is why I say it's not exclusively related to sales, because a company might look ahead. They might speak to their legal department ahead of time and go, hey, you know, this looks like this could go bad for us down the line. Maybe we shouldn't go this way now. You know what I mean? So it's all these kind of pros and cons. It's risk versus reward, and there's a lot of different things that can happen. Now, nothing has happened here in the UK. It's literally just something which came up, but the very fact that it did come up at all shows that at least there is some kind of step towards something in the future there. And again, it's about protecting people. It's about protecting people that can be exploited, you know, and for me that's kind of where this issue really lies. So a lawsuit against them, no, I think there's no need or cause, and I don't think it would be successful in any shape or form, but there are other ways to kind of go down that route, and I think people are already doing so. Okay, next up, Schnitten, who's forgive me, Schnitten. The problem with EA, Activision, Ubisoft, other publishers or similar size is that they are stock companies with investors at their back. They want a return on investment. Again, going back to this, the CEO of such a company will naturally start a research program to find out how to get the most money out of players at the current time. I'm not quite sure whether that's down to the CEO. I think it's probably like a department, okay? And that's going to influence the developers to create games that exploit the most promising avenues of earning money. This then is what creates this new hype of games as a service and having less titles where people stay longer with. That is definitely true. I definitely know this, that some of these big games are having a higher turnover. So they're not retaining players. So there's a much higher turnover now. So it's like, instead of gamers just coming in, liking what they see, liking what they experience, and going, you know, this is a series I can totally get on board with. People come in, they don't like the experience, they find that the player base are not engaged, and they leave. This has actually highlighted me in a direction. There's another video I want to make and come up soon, but I'll talk about that more on that video. But it's this idea I've had about the way in which player retention works within games. So you'll see that more in this video I'm going to do soon. So it says the initial cost of the game might be a bit higher, but in the long run the costs are going to be likely lower, as you only need to create additional content for an already established game, which is easier than starting from scratch. This in turn means that big development teams like the ones owned by the big publisher will not do what was done in the past, where one or several people together to create a game, maybe even in their spare time, then pitch it to a publisher once it was, well, I don't know about mostly complete, but yeah, they'll have something there, right? So it says the difference here being that the big development studios are nowadays more contractors that need to create formulaic content with monetization options, whereas small indie developers, while having less resources, will pour their passion into a game, and you can feel that passion every step of the way. Now look, that's true to an extent, but I also think it's a little bit unfair because, you know, yes, big publishers are about making money, etc, etc. These big developers still have real people working there who care about what they do, who put in massive big amounts of time, huge hours that they put into doing this stuff, who work incredibly hard, who are amazingly skilled at what they do, and they probably, you know, the reason they're really good at what they do is because they love what they do. So I don't think it's fair to, you know, totally break that down and try to lump developers in with these big companies which are all about making money. I do not think that's fair to do. I don't think you should like kind of generalize that, because again, if you're an illustrator, if you're an artist, if you're a coder, if you're you work on game mechanics, if you're QA, you know, whatever, there's so many different elements that have nothing to do with the decisions that get made at a larger level. So it's not fair to kind of go down that route. But it is definitely true that indie developers put a lot of passion into their game, and you feel that come through. I do totally agree, and I think because these big games are so big, it's hard to sometimes distill that through. So it's just there's some older games from the 8-bit, 16-bit days of gaming where the developer went out to create a game that they liked to play and did so, and some of them happened to just end up being large successes. He says, anyway, even if we can get past the loot crate systems that are the rage now, the big publishers will just find new ways to pay as little for their product while getting the most money out of it. Of course they will, that's why they're a big business. He says, I just wish that they would say it outright or just release those games as a service, as free-to-play games, as their monetization schemes are now becoming so close to free-to-play games as to be almost indistinguishable from them. Again, you're never going to have that. They're never going to come out and say like, hey, you know, we're doing you over. Hey, you know, they're never going to do that because that's not how it works. You know, part of being a business is, you know, you're sitting on those grey lines, you know, you're sitting on those indistinguishable things where it's like, hey, are we doing a deal? What are we doing? You know, are we screwing you over? Are we playing it safe? How's it going? You know, any big business is going to be doing that. You know, it's why big businesses don't pay for their taxes in some countries. You know, it's all these things. It's big business, it's bullshit, but it's just the way the world is, you know. But as I say, you know, it's not necessarily about that. It's about kind of having a conversation, leaning a direction, trying to just raise people's awareness so that we're all singing from the same page, and that hopefully people can try to enact some genuine change themselves. And with all that said then, I think a pretty poignant comment for the final comments today. So Kaiserwolf says, as someone who consistently spends money on gacha draws in free-to-play mobile games, mostly Japanese titles like Grand Blue and Starlight Stage, and other PC free-to-play games like Warframe, War Thunder, PlanetSide 2, I've been generally fine with it, because they're free-to-play. I've quite practically spent over $3,500 over 3 years playing just these few games. Now sometimes when the rolls aren't quite good, even after I spend $100 in a single draw session, I tended to curse the game company because I got fuck all. However, with the advent of AAA $60 games with loot boxes, I've started viewing the free-to-play gacha rolls as not a problem anymore, because the rates and chances of getting them are fully disclosed. Sometimes there are even events that double up the chances or just outright buy the single thing you want once. But with that said, the AAA titles that have loot boxes in addition to the full price title are quite practically the worst system that I have seen yet. You can spend weeks grinding in Battlefront 2 to get scrap to buy that single weapon you want, and sometimes you don't even get enough because it's RNG. So don't even get me started on the skill cards with game balance breaking skill effects. Most free-to-play games these days have an extremely fair monetization model like Warframe, where you don't even have to spend money to get premium currency, and these AAA titles feel like they slapped it on and made it as lucrative as possible with the skill and weapon advantages, all the while making the free grind absolutely horrible to incentivize just buying the crates. Overwatch is the lesser of evils on that loot box debacle. It's somewhat tolerable since they are just cosmetic items, but for the love of God, Just let me buy the damn skin I want and not roll 40 boxes to get enough currency to buy the skin. All that said, I guess my point is free-to-play games that I once viewed as RNG garbage don't seem so much right now because the big companies just made ones that were way worse. But I think that's pretty interesting. I think it's interesting that Kaiser's got like a really genuinely invested perspective. It's not someone who has never bought loot boxes or crates or any kind of in-game items and just throwing their opinion out there. He clearly has already invested perspective there, so I do find that kind of interesting and credible, and also the fact that somebody who can look at this and go, well, you know what, like, I can see that it's bad, I can see sometimes I make a mistake or whatever, but I don't mind, it's kind of my choice, I'm going in that direction. And it is good to have that as a kind of objective point of view to sort of throw in there, to see that from one person's perspective, this thing could be nothing other than bad. Like loot boxes, loot crates, in-game microtransactions, for many people, including me, can be seen now as pretty much only a negative thing. But, there are some people who, again, blinkered perspectives thinking, oh, this is all excellent. Nothing can go wrong here whatsoever. People that are informed, understand how this stuff works, and are, to a degree, still okay with it. And I think, you can disagree, but it is just kind of interesting and relevant to actually have all of those perspectives when you're having a conversation about this, so you can try to see all the different points of view and then inform your own view as well as to whether you think something is really bad or not. Now, that was this week's topic where we were thinking about the open world microtransactions. I think a lot of the talk and the comments that people were making there were pretty generalized. We've been thinking a lot about microtransactions, what they mean to people, and how they affect people. Now we go on to this week's topic for you guys to answer. These videos come out on every Tuesday and Thursday, providing I can get it out actually on time, which I try really hard to do. But this week, one of the big topics doing the round was the case of Bungie banning players of Destiny 2 on PC for using simple overlays. Now, I will say, I didn't think this was like a giant story to discuss initially, but I really thought about it a lot today, and it's actually taken me in a different direction. Okay, so here we go. Now, as I say, this in and of itself seems to be something that people kind of take at face value. That is the banning of people periodically in games. But it really shouldn't be. It's another one of those things where there is a huge disconnect between players and big publishers. At the same time, hacking of games and the selling of software that enables people to cheat their way through and make the experience of others miserable continues unabated. So do we accept this as the price we pay for companies attempting to make our experiences just as intended? Essentially, for me, no. The reason being, it's not so much the actual banning that is the issue, although it kind of is. It's the unwillingness of any large company to engage. And that again displays a total apathy for its own customers. A kind of faceless, just uncaring state. And they originally did the standard fare, this is Bungie, did the standard fare of we never make mistakes and everything is a smooth, well-oiled machine. They released this press release, as always, standard stock stuff. But a few hours later then went on to state that maybe some people were banned as part of a human error, and you're kind of like, yeah, okay, alright, we see where this is going. What a shocker. Now, especially when they wanted to clarify that a ban is never an automatic process and involves a manual investigation. Supposed software that was causing this confusion included stuff like OBS, XSplit, other things that were using overlays, even like MSI Afterburner. And the issue here, again, it's not that interesting. A pretty tiny percentage of the player base were probably incorrectly banned. And as I said before, this is something that have we just come to realise as being one of those things in gaming? Well, even if it is, that means some people are out at least $60 for basically doing nothing wrong at all. The issue here is not the ban, it's the fact that those players have no recourse. They can't dispute the ban, and Bungie says it will not overturn bans. And here's a quote for you. Permanent account bans are implemented only with rigorous checking to ensure the innocent are not punished alongside the guilty. Which is comical, seeing as they have already undermined that statement by admitting that some bans are potentially human error. So the whole thing is just a complete nonsense, as usually these kind of things are. Now, I can give you an excellent example as to why I no longer really play online RPG MMO games. You might think this is me going randomly off topic, but stay with me. Now, to be fair, this is only one fragment of the reason, so it's not that I would never consider an RPG MMO again, but it's a pretty strong nail in the coffin, which has stuck with me for many years. Another reason is these games tend to take an exorbitant amount of time to play or really get anywhere, and I simply just do not have that time available. Now, roll back with me over a decade ago, in fact, which is actually kind of scary. I also apologise because it's about WoW again, so... But just, just stay with me. So, look, back when I used to play WoW, I played in a pretty hardcore raiding guild. Now, this meant a pretty significant investment of my personal time. So usually 5 days, 6 days a week, at least often for about 10 hours a day, sometimes more, sometimes a bit less. I was a student at the time, so I could handle it. I had been playing WoW for about 4 years. I think I played about 6 years in total. And if you're not aware, WoW required a subscription per month back then of I think about £15, as I remember, per month. So not only a huge time investment, but a reasonable financial investment to what essentially was my core game. What made this worse was that I was heavily involved in the WoW PvP ladder system at the time, and this is where you would grind honour each week to rank up against other players in your server to achieve the highest rank that you could get, which was High Warlord, and gain access to top tier PvP gear which you couldn't get any other way. And it was very, very competitive. At that stage I was very close to reaching this rank of, I was at general rank, the rank of a general, and I was only a couple of steps away from getting High Warlord. It was going to take me a few more weeks. And we would literally grind PvP games week in, week out, almost every day. Now this is all relevant as to give you an idea of how devastating it can be when a company turns around and then just bans you. So one day, one morning as I remember, I come to log into my account, get ready for the day's PvP. Blizzard have banned me. And I remember exactly the phrase that they used in an email that I got sent, which said, I was banned because of abuse of in-game mechanics. An incredibly vague term that could mean almost anything. They didn't specify where or when or it was just abuse of in-game mechanics, and that was it. And to be fair, right, okay, also, no ego here, but I wasn't just a random like loot bot character that was around grinding gold or trying to get, bits and pieces. Yeah, I was a pretty well-known player among the guilds on my server. I'd been playing for several years, and I was a high-ranking, well-experienced player who'd been doing a lot of stuff there. So, and I was also active in the Blizzard forums at the time. So this was really obscure, and it was so insane, and I just assumed that it was going to get easily identified by Blizzard. I just assumed that I could get this sorted out. I didn't think it was going to be any big trouble. So I proceeded to do this. I sent them a lengthy email in reply explaining about how I was a loyal player of the game, and that this was critically damaging to my whole experience, because every day that went past when I was not on in grinding PvP, which I had already put basically months into at that point, maybe more, I was losing my rank. I was losing any chance to get that first position on the PvP ladder, which had been my big goal for like 6 months probably at that point. Now Blizzard's response was a copy and paste stock email, which just stated they considered the matter closed, they would not correspond any further. Bam. And that was for them the end of the matter. And this character I had invested about 4 years of my time into, and a pretty solid sum of money as well. All of that scrubbed out instantly by them, with no way for me to appeal or use other character references from people. Just bam, you're done. I was totally dismayed, and eventually I just kind of decided I would start over with a new character, friends that I had in my pretty big guild. A lot of guys who were doing high-end raiding and stuff were like, we'll help you out, we'll help you we'll do some ults, we'll play, we'll get you up to rank, and then so on and so on. 3 months later, Blizzard emailed me out of the blue and explained that due to a human error, I was banned and my character was now fully reinstated, and they gave me 6 months of free playtime. Now you think, oh well, it's just one of those things. But unfortunately, by this time passing, my PvP position was so degraded that I was totally out of sync with my team, and I also, at that time, I really didn't have the free time now to climb back all the time that I would have had to put into it to achieve it again. Not to mention the fact that the incident had totally broken my morale, because I realized they completely control your character, they completely control you, your investment of time and money, and at any time they can just take it away with no recourse, no discussion. They own you in these games. Still, I played on for many years in PvE, and we did have some amazing fun achievements, and I still enjoyed all my time that I had there after that. But it was a very, very sour period, and you know, I never really thought about it till this week, but I guess it kind of did actually formulate some of my opinion about big companies when it comes to games. So that one incident had a pretty big impact on me, and I guess it still does, because it reminds me of how dangerous it is to over-invest in any game, both in time and in stuff like paid transactions. That is to say, at least a game where your time and investment is focused into a character. So essentially all RPGs, especially if it's an online RPG. Now, if it was an FPS and you got temporarily banned, well, and you come back again, you lose all your rank or whatever, you can scratch it, you start over, you know, you're a little bit less geared than others. That's actually why, after WoW, I returned to FPS, because I wanted an experience that was instantaneous, didn't require hundreds of hours to be invested before you could actually reap any rewards of your knowledge, your experience, and working with others. That's what FPS games are fantastic for, because you get in, and from rank 1, you're getting a full experience. Well, you used to anyway, but you know what I'm saying, like you can jump in, you got a gun, you run forward, you get in there, you're getting the game experience. Do you know what I mean? It's a big disparity between that and like an RPG MMO, where, for example, often in some of these games they say, you know, the game doesn't begin until you max rank and then you start doing other stuff. So anyway, but today's question, so it's an open thing today. Today's question is, what do you think about Bungie's faceless interaction with its community? The question is, has my story made you rethink the way you might view stuff like RPG MMO games, or games where you invest a lot of time and money? And lastly, do you have any experiences yourself of being banned wrongly by a publisher or a developer? Did they handle your case positively or negatively? This is an area of discussion, guys, I don't think comes up that often, you know, not in the general course of things, and it's one that I'd actually pretty much forgotten about until now. Like I say, you kind of see these things happen and you go, oh yeah, that thing is happening, right? With all that said, the issue of hackers and cheaters in games is still with us, and is this simply the price we pay for online gaming? That periodically a load of people get banned and some people get screwed over? Is that just where we're at? Tell me in the comments down below, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, I hope you enjoyed. A little bit of a longer episode, but tons to discuss and think about on this one. Next episode is back on Tuesday. This is Looting, guys, and this is Below the Line.